Visit AnyExpat for relocation assistance.
In 1990, Europe stood on the edge of a new chapter in history. The Cold War had ended. The Berlin Wall had fallen. And a continent that had been divided for nearly half a century was suddenly opening to change. For millions of people across Europe, the next 30 years would bring dramatic transformation. Entire economic systems would collapse. New markets would emerge. Industries would rise and fall. And wages, the measure of how societies reward work, would change in ways few people expected. In some countries, salaries would triple. In others, they would barely move. And in one country at the heart of Europe, something even stranger would happen. Workers would end up earning less than they did 30 years earlier. This is the story of Europe's wage divide. In 1990, Europe was not just politically divided. It was economically divided as well. Western Europe had spent decades building some of the world's most advanced economies. Countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands had strong industries, established companies, and relatively high wages. Their economies were built on open markets, global trade, and technological innovation. But on the other side of the continent, the situation was very different. Eastern Europe had spent decades under centrally planned economic systems. Governments controlled production. Prices were fixed by the state. Private businesses were limited or non-existent. Factories often operated inefficiently, producing goods that struggled to compete internationally. As a result, wages across much of Eastern Europe were dramatically lower than in the West. Workers earned only a fraction of what their Western counterparts did. Then, almost overnight, the system collapsed. When communist governments across Eastern Europe fell, the region entered a period of economic upheaval. State-owned industries were suddenly privatized. Markets that had once been tightly controlled were open to competition. Foreign investors began arriving, looking for opportunities in newly liberalized economies. But the transition was not easy. In many countries, inflation surged. Factories closed. Millions of workers lost jobs that had once seemed guaranteed. For a time, living standards actually fell. Yet beneath the chaos, something important was happening. A new economic foundation was being built. Private businesses began to grow. Entrepreneurs launched new companies. And international trade began connecting Eastern Europe to the global economy. Over time, these changes would reshape the region in remarkable ways. Nowhere was the transformation more dramatic than in the Baltic states. In the early 1990s, these countries faced enormous challenges. Their economies had been deeply integrated into the Soviet system, and independence meant rebuilding almost everything from scratch. But their governments embraced rapid reform. They opened their markets to global trade. They encouraged foreign investment, and they pursued integration with Western Europe. Over time, new industries emerged. Technology companies appeared, infrastructure improved, and wages began to rise. By 2020, average wages in Lithuania had increased by more than 270% compared to 1990s. Neighboring Estonia and Latvia experienced similar surges. What had once been among the poorest economies in Europe were now some of the fastest growing. For many economists, the Baltic region became a symbol of successful economic transformation. Further south, Central European countries were experiencing their own economic revival. One of the most notable examples was Poland. In the early 1990s, Poland implemented a bold set of economic reforms, often described as shock therapy. Prices were liberalized. Trade barriers were removed. State industries were privatized. The transition was painful in the short term, but over time it began to pay off. Foreign companies established factories across the country. Manufacturing expanded rapidly. Exports grew. Cities modernized. Between 1990 and 2020, Polish wages increased by nearly 100%. The country had transformed from a struggling post-communist economy into one of Europe's most dynamic markets. While Eastern Europe was experiencing rapid growth, Western Europe followed a different path. Countries such as Germany and France saw wages increase much more slowly. But this slower growth had a simple explanation. These economies were already wealthy. Workers in Western Europe had been earning relatively high salaries long before 1990. As a result, their economies focused less on catching up and more on maintaining stability. Industries evolved gradually. Technological innovation continued. But wage growth remained moderate rather than explosive. Western Europe had already reached a high level of economic development. The challenge was not catching up. It was staying competitive. In Northern Europe, countries such as Sweden and Finland pursued a different economic model. These societies combined strong social safety nets with highly productive industries. Education systems emphasized innovation and research. Technology companies became key drivers of growth. The result was steady, sustainable economic expansion. Wages increased gradually, supported by strong productivity and advanced industries. Rather than dramatic economic swings, the Nordic region became known for balance. A blend of stability, innovation, and long-term planning. Not all parts of Europe shared the same success. In Southern Europe, wage growth was far weaker. Countries such as Spain and Portugal experienced only modest increases over the 30-year period. Several factors contributed to this slower growth. Productivity gains were limited. Youth unemployment remained high. And the global financial crisis of 2008 hit the region particularly hard. Government debt surged. Economic growth slowed. And wage increases became difficult to sustain. Yet even within this struggling region, one country stood out. Between 1990 and 2020, Italy experienced something unprecedented. Average wages declined. Over 3 decades, Italian workers ended up earning about 3% less than before. It was the only country in the European Union where wages fell during this period. For decades after World War II, Italy had been one of Europe's major industrial powers. Its factories produced cars, machinery, fashion, and luxury goods exported around the world. But over time, deeper structural challenges emerged. Productivity growth slowed. Economic reforms proved difficult to implement, and global competition intensified. The result was decades of economic stagnation. A remarkable contrast to the rapid growth seen elsewhere in Europe. Over the past 30 years, Europe has undergone one of the most dramatic economic transformations in modern history. Former communist economies surged forward. Established Western nations remained stable. Southern Europe struggled with slower growth. And one country became a cautionary tale of economic stagnation. But Europe's story is far from finished. New technologies, demographic changes, and shifting global markets will shape the continent's future. And when the next generation looks back at the map of Europe's wages, they may see a continent that has changed once again.
Visit AnyExpat for relocation assistance. Don't forget to like and subscribe.